Hello friends, I'm Paul Estabrooks. Today I want to tell you about the return to Michael Beach. In videos 11 and 15, I shared about Project Pearl, the biggest project I was ever involved in. On June the 18th, 1981, 20 men on a tugboat and a barge delivered 232 tons of Chinese Bibles onto a beach in China to believers waiting there. 1 million Bibles. They were small pocket size. You'll see a picture of one shortly if you haven't already. And yet 1 million of them weighed 232 tons. That was an incredible project, and I shared with you what happened and some of the impact on the last video. Today I want to share with you about the trips that I've had to go back to that beach where it all happened many years later. We called it Michael Beach, after the same name as the tugboat because it's named after the Archangel Michael, and we knew we needed all the angelic help we could get for this project. And that was the name of the beach where we left those Bibles at 11 o'clock at night after 2 hours of offloading, noisily offloading, and yet no one stopped us, and headed back to the Philippines where we had started from. The interesting thing was that there were thousands of people waiting on that beach and helping to deliver those boxes of Bibles, both immediately and through storage areas to get them hidden away, where it took 5 years, of course, for them all to get individually shared through almost every province in the country except Tibet. Well, we were excited to walk back on that beach in the year 2005. This was 24 years after the project. I took a tour group to China, and Captain Bill Tinsley, who was the key man for the project. I just can't say how significant Bill was to this project. He designed the whole concept of a submersible barge and a tugboat pulling it with a crew of 20 guys. And it was his plan that God gave him and his incredible leadership that enabled it to actually be accomplished. Well, Bill came with me in the group that went to China, and we stopped at the beach outside the city of Shantou in southern China. It was amazing. Terry Madison, who was with us on the project and worked with Open Doors for some years, he and Carol were in China already, and so they came down and joined us. And so the three of us walked that beach where those Bibles had been delivered. Now, the captain was on the bridge the whole time, the 2 hours we were there. He never walked on the sand. Brother David, our director, and Joseph did. Only two of our team, I think Keith, 3 of our team, were actually on the sand with the believers talking to the leaders while we were busy, very busy, getting those Bibles off the barge, into the water, towed with little boats. Terry and I were both in 2 of 3 little rubber boats that pulled these blocks close enough to shore that the men came out in the water, some of them right up to their neck, and then grabbed the ropes and dragged them into the beach and then took out the boxes and handed them daisy chain up the beach. Well, now we were able to actually, the 3 of us, to walk on the beach for the first time, and it was an amazing feeling. We saw the rocks where the fishermen were fishing at the time when we arrived at 9 o'clock at night, who had actually helped the believers get those some of those Bibles off the beach, and then went to town and reported what had happened, that a bunch of Russians had come and left something there, and that created the patrol, which I shared about in the last video. We did not meet any believers on that trip because we still realized that this was a sensitive project in China, and we didn't want to get anyone in trouble. And secondly, none of us spoke fluent Mandarin, and so it was easier just to go on the beach and thank God for what he did in that place. So it was a wonderful time we had. Now, 10 years later, in 2015, Open Doors was celebrating its 60th anniversary, and the Hong Kong office decided to have a special event when they would highlight Project Pearl. And they invited as many guys as could come to the conference in Hong Kong. And then they promised to take us to the beach where it happened and actually introduce us to some of the people who were on the beach the night when we arrived there and who helped distribute those Bibles. Well, that was something most of us couldn't turn down. Out of the 20 men, 3 had gone already to be with the Lord, and 6 of us were able to go. And of course, the captain and 4 other guys besides myself. And we went to Hong Kong to the conference, and then we went to the beach. And it was amazing. We met for the first time men who were there that night when we dropped those 1 million Bibles on the beach. It was a very emotional meeting because of what had been accomplished since then. They were still raving. They said this story, Project Pearl, is the story that is told most often in this whole area because many Christians live in that area. And they said they're still talking about the Bibles that came from the sea. And one of them was the pastor, and we were surprised about many things. One was that in the years after Project Pearl, the Christians in the area had built a brand new church, a beautiful building. And they paid for it themselves, they built it themselves, and it was not registered with the government, at least the Three Self-Patriotic Movement in Beijing, but it was registered locally somehow and allowed to function. Part of the reason they were untouched and left alone was that no one was paid in this church. The pastor, the janitor, the training staff, everyone was a volunteer. Nobody got a salary. And you know that they therefore used the bulk of the money that they received as offerings to send missionaries out to Western China in the Muslim area of the country. And we were just so excited to see this church, meet the lead pastor, who was one of the men on the beach that night, and to meet Charlie, who was the man who met the fisherman that I talked about last week as well. They also introduced us to the oldest man, and this was the most emotional meeting. The oldest man there was 91 years of age. So that means he was 57 the night of Project Pearl. And he was one who had a little bamboo raft with a paddle. And he was so gung-ho to help us with this project that he paddled his little bamboo raft out the couple of 100 meters that we were anchored out there. And he wanted to come on board and help the guys get these blocks off the deck into the water so that the little boats could tow them into shore. Well, the guys were all busy, and they just smiled at him and waved at him, and of course none of them spoke Mandarin either. And so he just sat in his raft, they said, and prayed for the success of the project. But we all remembered him. It was just a unique thing to see this little guy paddling away on his bamboo raft while we're working hard to get these things on the beach and then get out of there. Well, he was now 91. And when he met us, he began to weep. And of course, when we heard his story, so did we, because he said, I asked God to let me live until I met somebody who brought us those 1 million Bibles that night on the beach on June 18, 1981. And he said, God has answered my prayer today. And I tell you, I don't remember seeing so many men weeping as we were at that meeting. And it was so neat to meet him. And Charlie was the interpreter for us at that point. And it was just a very, very special time. Well, while we were on the beach, we recorded a documentary. And it's on YouTube, on my channel. You can find it there. It's called 1 Million Miracles. And there are clips in it that I want to show you now of the 5 guys who were with me. Very short, but you will get a sense of how exciting it was for all of us to be back on this beach. And not just on the beach this time, but to also meet with our brothers and sisters who were part of the project way back in 1981.
Delivering 1 million Bibles to China is worth life itself, and if it should cost mine, it would be well worth it. And that comes from my heart.
As one of the 20-member crew, I personally saw God perform miracle after miracle for Project Pearl to be accomplished. We used an ocean-going tugboat named Michael and a semi-submersible barge we named Gabriella to accomplish the job. Over several months of training and sailing, we constantly saw God miraculously at work.
We had all kinds of problems because this boat, as I mentioned before, was built 5 years before. All the electronic devices on the boat were installed 5 years before, and there is a limited life on electronic equipment. And all of our electronic equipment failed, and I can only say this, that God had to be guiding us that night. I am not that great a navigator. I had very little equipment to work with, as I explained, and yet we found that little cove, which we now refer to as Michael Beach.
My task was to sit in the radio room in Manila. I was the land-based radio operator, and I was to be communicating with the tugboat and also had a phone link into Hong Kong with the family Kwong member relaying the messages that we were sending back and forth. So the message that was sent across, that came back and forth from the church in China and the tugboat, was prepare 18 bowls of rice, 21 cups of tea. That was saying that on 18 June 1981, 2100 hours, which is 9 p.m. military time, the tugboat would be at the beach and everything would be happening.
Project Pearl was by far the highlight of my whole Christian life. It was an astonishing event. I couldn't believe it was happening at the time, and I got within 100 yards of the beach. Captain said to me, "Chief Engineer, you need to stay by the machinery." I said, "Fine." But hey, to be back here now, to be actually standing on the beach where all of those Bibles were unloaded is the culmination and the finishing, really, of a project that has in many ways dominated my life. I did an awful lot of speaking about it afterwards. And Project Pearl is still alive. It still lives in me. It's still part of my whole kind of testimony. And by the grace of God, we arrived here a couple hundred yards off of this beach. And the process began of unloading the Bibles. The volunteers here on the beach were ready and waiting, and they were keen. They got in the water, pulled the packages out. It was a concerted effort which resulted in, you know, success.
When I came here on the beach and I met my brother who came on the raft to the barge, and when he was kneeling down praising the Lord, and now we met here together and we talked together and pray in my own language and praise the Lord. I had to cry. I could hardly speak.
Met each other, Father. And I ask that you will bless this church in Jesus' name.
Because
Amen.
the Lord had made it possible that we met after 34 years. I met him, and now I could see him here, and that was amazing, amazing. And now even if I see here the surrounding, the miracle is even bigger, because who had ever dreamed that we were able to go here on the beach and bring all those Bibles?
So we got going, and I was able to go to the beach. And I don't know why I did it, but I jumped out of the Z-boat, and I was able to look, like I'm looking at you, just a couple feet away from one of the co-workers that was on the beach. And after I looked at him for just a minute, I realized this is not what I'm here for. I need to get to work. So I got back into the Z-boat and started going back and forth pulling in the packages.
We safely left this beach at 11 p.m. that night with 1 million Bibles on the beach here in this cove.
We were a bunch of guys, and we were all fairly, I suppose, conservative. There wasn't a great deal of emotion at any time, but the euphoria that we showed when we were outside of the Chinese territorial waters everybody started falling about the place, hugging one another, weeping. I mean, it was just, you know, we tend to use words rather loosely, but I use the word euphoria in its absolute sense. I have never seen, it redefines the word for me, what happened that night on the tugboat. We went through another storm to get back to the Philippines. Who cares? We just were rejoicing because the impossible had been done.
4 hours later, there were no Bibles left on the beach at all. All of the boxes of Bibles that were left were up here on the tree line behind the beach. A Public Security Bureau group were attracted to this area then by all the activity, as well as reports from the fishermen who were nearby. They found some of those Bible boxes here under the trees and tried to burn them unsuccessfully. So they threw them into the water, individual Bibles as well as whole boxes of Bibles, into the water of this cove. The tide and current carried the Bibles and boxes of Bibles out into the water and around the point that you see behind me, down around the peninsula to the river that runs down to the city of Santo, where they were plucked out of the water by swimmers and fishermen. Those who retrieved the Bibles took them to the front of the official church in the city and sold them to believers who were willing to buy them. Most Christians would pay any amount for a copy of a personal Bible. Other believers who lived near fishermen had a totally different experience. Well, that ended where Charlie comes in and talks about the fishermen who plucked the Bibles, both boxes and individual books, out of the water as they floated down the stream. Some of them that the military threw into the water after they discovered them later at 3 o'clock in the morning. Also, you saw Captain Bill Tinsley there, who was suffering from cancer at that time. He had a number of cancers, and 4 months later, he went to be with the Lord. So this was the last international trip he made, and he was just so excited to be able to do that and to be there. So I would encourage you to watch the whole documentary. It's only half an hour, and it's on the YouTube, called 1 Million Miracles. And it's, of course, based on the story, which I've written in my book, called Night of a Million Miracles. And this book is available on Amazon.ca as well as from Open Doors Canada. Next week, I want to then do a wrap-up on this project because there's so much more to share. There are some surprises we learned while we were on the beach that day in 2015, 5 years ago. They were amazing, and I think you will enjoy hearing those surprises. And then Todd Miller, one of the crew, composed a special song about the project called 1 Million Miracles, the same name as the documentary. And he'll sing that for us next time, and you'll see some pictures from China at that time as well, which I think you will enjoy. Thanks be to God for his amazing gift, the gift of Jesus, who was the Word, the living Word, who lived the written Word, so that we might have life eternal.